Well, everybody, welcome. We've had a little bit of a hiatus here from the PowerLunch. Before everyone got on, Rowdy and I were kind of talking about the impacts that we've kind of all seen from COVID, and the PowerLunch has also been touched by that, where one of our presenters ended up getting COVID right before we did it, and we had to make some schedule changes. So hopefully everyone's staying safe and doing well, and all that. And if you've been through it, you can put on your leotard and your cape because you are a super person now. You can walk about freely. So, anyway, no, it's good to see everybody. Today we have kind of an encore. We have Rowdy Roddick from Synology here with us. As I was kind of alluding to, we had Rowdy on with us before, and um, he did a really good job of showing Synology and the technology that's there, and the things that they're doing with their product and their tools, and it generated a lot of interest. People asking questions, people exploring it as options, and looking to use these tools, not just the storage aspects, but the other tools in different and creative ways. Since that, we've had customers who have kind of dipped their toe into it and gotten some smaller units to experiment with, and have plans to move on to bigger units just because there's some neat capabilities that they've built into the product set. So I'm looking forward to Rowdy's presentation today. If you have questions, feel free to ask those, I guess, in the chat. If you want to write it down, you can just go ahead and throw it in the chat, and Haley and I will keep track of that, Rowdy, so you don't have to worry about doing that. We'll keep track of it, and we'll ask questions at the end. And then and the format is Rowdy has a presentation, and he'll go through it and show us some things. But if you have a question, you can feel free to ask, because this is meant to be a forum where we exchange information about technology, and as a community we learn more about tech. So that's what we're about. Oh, and not to leave this out, Rowdy very graciously has provided a raffle item. So the Wheel of Death, Wheel of Fun, the Wheel of Happy Thoughts will be back. And I think is it a disc station, Rowdy?
Yeah, it'll be a DS120J. So when I presented last June, it's the same model as that. So it's basically your own personal NAS. It's a one bay, so it's pretty small, but it does a good job if you want to organize your photos or anything like that. And you can also use the disk station to send those photos to an offsite location. So if you want to send it to your Dropbox account or Google Drive or anything like that.
Sweet. So I can take the pictures from my dinner that I load on Facebook and archive them there, so everyone can see what I ate for the last month. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Very good. Well, it's good to see everybody. Haley, do we have anything else we need to talk about? I think that was about it. I think we can launch into it. So with that, I give you all the dude that has my favorite name in the business. I got to be honest, Rowdy Roddick from Synology.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Rowdy. As Keith mentioned, I presented back in June. And so I wanted to make sure that this presentation wasn't a total retread on everything else, because I'm not sure how many here were at that presentation and how many that were not able to attend that. So this is kind of a mix of some things that I haven't talked about or I didn't talk about in the last presentation. We'll also take another look at active backup for Office 365, which I think we did touch on that in the last presentation.
We did, but I think it's good to talk about it.
Sure. So I wanted to review that because Keith said that he was getting a lot of questions about that as well. So we're also going to be talking about Synology Drive. So that is a software application that you can install on your NAS to essentially make it your own private cloud solution, very similar to Google Drive or Dropbox if you're familiar with those platforms. This is a way that you can essentially build that license free. So there's no subscription licenses or anything like that involved. So we'll take a look at that, as well as our backup software for Office 365. That also is license free. Basically everything we're going to be talking about today, you can all do without any license or subscription fees at all. Then we're going to talk about best practices for securing your Synology NAS. I'll talk about some of the key things to keep in mind in terms of like auto block IP and also setting up two-factor authentication. And then at the end, we're going to round out by talking about snapshot replication. So before we talked about hyper backup and active backup for business in the last presentation. We didn't touch much on snapshots though, so I'll demo that really quick and explain where you might want to be using snapshot technology.
Awesome.
So with that, we'll start off by talking about Synology Drive. And so Drive is essentially it allows for file syncing, sharing, and collaboration. So this is a bit different. Typically, the standard issue with the NAS is you're going to be mapping a network, a shared folder to your network drive, essentially. So you can take Windows File Explorer, map a network drive, a file share to your PC, and then you can access that. We found that one of the things, and this of course is accelerated now in the age of remote work, is people want to be able to access those files from anywhere, so they don't have to worry about setting up a VPN or any kind of configuration or anything like that. So that was the main driver behind Synology Drive. That's the reason why we wanted to build this as a solution. But also we wanted to make it a lot easier to share files. So to make it to where it's easier to send a link of a group of files to a bunch of people, maybe ones that are outside of your organization. One example that I really like to think of is if you're a photographer and you take a bunch of photos at a wedding and you want to send all those photos to a bunch of people, but they're not necessarily people who have an account on your NAS, right? I mean, these are people who attended a wedding, they were just a client of yours. You can basically create your own custom sharing link to be able to send all those photos at once. You can also set expiration dates and passwords for that link to make sure it's secure so that not just anyone can access it. And it's also great for sharing files within an organization as well. So if you have multiple offices, if you have remote workers, this is a great way to make it so that everybody can be synced and have all their files shared. And then the other thing too is it allows for collaboration. So there is a web-based UI that you can basically edit Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents in a web browser, any web browser from anywhere, and you can have multiple people editing them at once. If you've ever used Google Docs before, you'll probably be familiar with this. You have multiple accounts, people can add comments and make edits and things like that. So it's a lot of things all at once that kind of accomplishes a lot, but at the end of the day, we wanted this to be a private cloud solution to make it as easy as possible for people to access and share their files from anywhere. And before we move on to a demo of it, I just want to show this as a quick visual. So basically, you'll have the Drive server installed on the Synology NAS itself. And there's going to be three different, there's the Synology web portal. So once you have it installed on the NAS, you'll have the data on the NAS. So all of the data is actually being stored on the NAS. There's no cloud repository that it's being hosted at. So it's different from, say, Google Drive in that sense. So you're the one that's in control of the data, but you're able to access that data from any web browser using a custom link. I'll show you in a sec how to access that. You can also save it or bookmark that link and then access it easily that way so you don't have to log into the NAS to find it. And then in addition to that, there's several other ways that you can access besides the web browser. So there's the desktop agent. So you can basically map the Synology Drive folder to your Windows client. We also do support Mac OS and Linux as well. Although the functionality for those is a bit different than it is for Windows. Windows is a bit more fleshed out, but that'll allow you to basically implement it into Windows File Explorer, and then you can see and view those documents from there also. And we do also have Android and iOS apps as well that are integrated with Synology Drive. So a very popular use case that I've seen a lot is in the construction industry. There will be a lot of people who have iPads out in the work field, so they want to be able to access PDFs, construction documents, things like that. And so they'll use the Synology Drive app to be able to get those documents onto their mobile device. And then in addition to that, you can also sync from this one server to other Synology NASs. You can do this across multiple Synology devices. There is a limit and it depends on what model of Synology you're using. So if you have any questions on that, please reach out to us and we can help you. You can also look at the data sheet for the model and those details will be there in there as well. But there's some caveats to be aware of and there is a limit, but you could have theoretically dozens of NAS units all syncing. So an example there would be, let's say this NAS in the middle of the screen here is at your main headquarters, your main office. But if, let's say you have 3 or 4 other branch offices in different locations, you can set up a remote NAS on each one of those and then connect it to the main headquarter NAS so that any changes or files that are changed in that headquarters are reflected to the other NAS devices. But you can also set it up so that not all of the shared folders are syncing. So if there are documents Let's say you're syncing across countries. So there's documents in Germany and they're all in German, and you don't want to be syncing those German versions of those documents over to your UK office, but there are other documents you want to sync. So you can choose what all you want to have synced and what you want to keep separate on each NAS. Okay, so I'm gonna hop out of here in PowerPoint and we're gonna go in, take a look. Can everyone see my screen here? Is everyone able to see my screen? I'm in the Synology DSM right now.
Yep. Yep. Looks good.
Yep.
Cool. So this is DSM, so this is the operating system for Synology for those who aren't familiar. So I'm gonna go into the Synology Drive application itself, and you'll see it actually opens up in a separate window. So I'm not in DSM right now. I am logged in with my Synology account that's associated with DSM. So not just anyone is going to be able to access this link. You'll need to create a user account for people to actually see the folders and everything else and to be able to share files. So it's very secure in that sense. Again, this is a private cloud solution. So I'll see this folder here that says demo, and I'll click on this one that says Excel docs. So you'll see I have this, you'll see I actually have two versions of this particular Excel document right here. So this is the actual Microsoft Excel document. You can see it was created a while ago. But then I also have this version here with a different icon, and this is actually the Synology Office version. So if I open this, it'll still open and allow me to view this particular Excel document. So, but I can't make any edits to it because I'm not in the web-based UI for editing. Basically, we have to create our own separate file format for that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But if I want to, all I have to do is click this Import to Synology Office button, and then that's going to automatically create the web-based version. So I'm going to open up the exact same Excel file. And so now this is where I can actually make edits. So if this is data that I need to change here, I can go ahead and make edits down the line. So again, I'm doing this all in my browser. Haven't even opened up Excel. And then once I'm done, I can choose to download it as an Excel file or as a PDF. Another thing too is this is, as I mentioned before, this allows for online collaboration. So you can have multiple people making edits to this Excel document at once. You can have people adding comments. You can see who commented where. So it's not just yourself, but you're able to share this with the rest of your team. You can choose who has access to each of these folders as well. So if you don't want people to be able to make changes, if there's certain members of the organization who shouldn't have permission to change the document, then you can do that as well to where they can see it but not make edits. And then another thing too is this will automatically be versioning this document here. So if I go to view history, I can see what different versions of this document looked like at different points in time. And then I can also choose, if I want to, I can go back here and right click and go to history. And then I can choose to actually restore one of these previous versions of the file that we just saw. I can also make a copy of it too. So if I don't want to overwrite my current format, but I do want to get back to what a previous version looked like, all I have to do is just click on this here and I can choose make a copy. So we'll do that right here. It'll ask me where I want to put it. I'll put it in the same folder. And then you'll see it'll name it. It'll have this one so that it prevents any corruption from having the same name. And then I can open this one up and we'll see how much this one differs from the current. So again, this is slightly different from, if we go out of the history, slightly different from what the current version looks like. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you can share files and folders as well. So if let's again think that this is a folder filled with photos that I want to share with people who don't have accounts to access my NAS. I can go down here and I can click share on right there. And so you can choose to just share it in general. So there's different permissions you can set here, right? So you have private, which means that only people that have a NAS account and who I've personally sent an invite to can access this file. So if this is a very sensitive document and I only want to send it to, let's say, the executive team of my company, but I don't want any of my other employees to see it, I can choose this option. If I want to make it available to anybody who has an account on this NAS, so if it's a company-wide document that everyone should be able to view, I can choose that here. Or if it's one where I want people to actually be able to make edits on, I can choose this option here. And then the other thing too is you can send it to anyone who has the link, and so they can view it, but you can also allow them to make edits to it as well. And for security purposes, if you're concerned about if this is sensitive data and there's some concerns there, I can go to this advanced protection link. And there's a couple of options you can have here to enhance the security when you're sharing this document. I can choose to require a password, and then I can set a password here that people need to have in order to open the file. And then I can also set a link expiration date. So think back to that example I had before. If I'm sharing photos for a wedding, people probably don't need to see those photos, a year from now, 2 years from now. They should be able to just download it and have it ready. So I can make this link expire, let's say 2 months from now, and then the link will automatically expire and people won't be able to access it through this link going forward. But of course, the data will still remain on my NAS. I see we have someone in the chat. Audit trail for edits. Yeah, so if people are making edits, you'll be able to see who's made those and who hasn't. Yeah, that's true. So if you go into history, you'll see, let's go in here, view history. So you'll see my username is Rowdy R. I'm the only one who's ever made any edits to this document. And so you'll see here, that's the name here will be listed on who made those changes and who didn't. Okay, that's about it in terms of Synology Drive. Are there any other questions before we move on? Is the original file read-only? Yeah, so the Excel file itself, when you first see it, it is going to be read-only. As I mentioned, you're not able to make any edits when it is an Excel file. The other file version here, you'll see the name's exactly the same, but the icon's different. So this is actually a Synology Office file. If you look here, you'll see that it takes up a little bit of size, but it actually doesn't take up nearly as much as the Excel file itself, because it's basically using the data of the Excel file and then just creating a version of it that you can edit in the browser. But yeah, the original Excel version is going to be read-only, and I can't make any edits on it until I convert it to a Synology Office file. Once I've made my edits in Synology Office, all I need to do is just download that file to the same folder location. I can choose to overwrite it as well, so I can overwrite the old Excel file if I want to. But in terms of the actual making edits and collaborating in real time, you're going to be doing that in the Synology Office version. Any other questions? Okay. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the PowerPoint, and we'll touch on active backup for O365 next. So 1 sec here. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen again. So just to clarify, it's Synology Drive, what we just talked about. Again, there's no license fees associated with that. It allows you to create your own private cloud solution with no subscription fees, nothing monthly that you have to pay to Google or Dropbox in order to maintain it, because you're the one that's in control of the data. And the same thing here for our active backup for Office 365 solution. So this allows you to back up O365 data with no license fees. Active Backup for O365 is part of our Active Backup suite. So there's 2 other applications here that are relevant. Active Backup for G Suite is essentially the same as O365, but for G Suite data instead of Microsoft 365 data. And then there's Active Backup for Business. We talked about that in the presentation last summer, so I'm not going to touch on Active Backup for Business here, but if you do want to look at that in more depth, please reach out to Keith and we can set up a call. I'd be more than happy to demo that personally for anyone. But that is what you can use to back up PCs, servers, and VMs, all with no license fees as well. And there's a couple of reasons why it's important to back up Office 365. You might be familiar with one of the main reasons, particularly for O365 itself, is the most popular plan is known as the E3 plan. And that plan does not allow for unlimited archiving of data. So if somebody deletes an email from their inbox, that email will be in the deleted folder section for 30 days, and then it's gone forever. So if there's ever any reason why somebody might have accidentally deleted an email that they didn't mean to, or they want to go back to data from a while ago and they can't find it, it's very important to make sure you back up that data, because the cloud vendor is not going to be backing up the data for you. Their responsibility is the infrastructure. So if anything happens to that, if anything's accidentally deleted, it's gone forever and there's no way to get it back if you're not currently backing up your SaaS data. The other thing too is those services could potentially, you could potentially lose the ability to access them. I personally use an O365 email, and Microsoft's email was down a couple weeks ago. I think it was a result of the new Xbox launch. It's the excuse they came up with, but I wasn't able to access my email at all for a couple of hours. And there's a few things, you know, if I ever needed to reset a password or anything like that, I'd be kind of SOL if I wasn't able to access my email in that way. So the availability is really useful to be able to access your emails anytime, even if Microsoft or Google happen to be down. Another thing too that's really important is security. So this allows you to make sure that you have your own copy of the data in case it very rarely would ever happen, but if there ever was a situation in which a cloud vendor that you're using for whether it's Microsoft or Google, if they were hacked and somebody was able to see their environment and potentially, you know, invoke some kind of ransomware or something like that, or delete your files, or if it's just a bad actor, maybe it's somebody who was a disgruntled employee and they want to delete everything. This allows you to have a backup on hand so you don't lose that data if it is lost in the cloud. And so O365 backup, we support inbox, so your mail, as well as SharePoint and OneDrive, contacts, and calendar. So anything there would all be able to be backed up with O365 with our backup solution. And this is continuous backup as well. So you're able to use 24/7, 365. We strongly recommend that, although you can also back up by scheduled or manually. But we recommend taking advantage of those 24 hours in a day just because O365 data changes a lot throughout a day. And so if you try to schedule your backups to only take place within 1 or 2 hours, it's possible, but that might not be enough time given how many changes might have taken place. That scales with an organization. I think an organization that has 15,000 users, that's more of a concern than if your organization has 20 users. But there is a difference there. So, and the thing is just continuous backup, it's better also because, you know, if there was some email that came in and you accidentally lost all your data for the day, continuous makes it so where you can just go back a few seconds ago and you'll still see that mail backed up in your backed up files. Whereas if it was an email from 9 hours ago and you're running it once a day, that email might be gone forever. The other thing too is we do support deduplication for these backups, so they're as efficient as possible in terms of the amount of storage space they take up. And we have a self-restore portal as well. So individual users can actually go in and retrieve individual emails or files from OneDrive and restore them on their own. So we're going to take a closer look at this here. I'm going to hop back into DSM. And so this is the Active Backup for O365 application itself. We renamed it recently, by the way, to Microsoft 365. So it's neither here nor there. It's still backing up the same stuff though. So you'll see this backup summary calendar. I can look here and see how many of my tasks were successful and how many were not. If I have all of my tasks are successful except for one, you'll get a red indicator. So even if just one happens to be unsuccessful, you'll be notified of that. And you'll also get a notification via email if you have set up alerts to receive that, so you'll know, hey, I need to go in there and fix my backup configuration. And I'll also see the total number of accounts and things that I'm backing up right here. So when you first set up your O365 backup task, you're going to go to create and then log in to your admin account. And I've already logged in, so I'm just going to click edit here and show everyone what this looks like in terms of how granular you can get with setting up the task. So if I go here to user, I can actually go in and not only can I choose to not back up certain users that are associated with my admin account, but I can choose on a granular level what all I want to be backing up for them. So an example here is we actually have a university of about 15,000 students and faculty. So they had about 15,000 O365 accounts total, and they've standardized all of their backup on Synology and or all of their O365 backup on us. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to back up the everything for the faculty, including OneDrive. They want to back up OneDrive files for the students in case the students were using them for music or movies or whatever. So they basically went in here and they created a group. So they have a group of the faculty and then a group of the students. And then for that group, they chose that they wanted to be backing up the drive files for the faculty, but not backing them up for the students, and then backing up, mail and everything else for the students. So you can kind of go in here and not just on a group level if you have a group policy set, but also on a user level as well, and individually determine what all you want to be backing up for each person. We can also go in here for SharePoint sites and choose which SharePoint sites we want to be backing up. And then when you add new accounts over time to O365, you can set here, this is the auto discovery service. So this is basically saying if a new account is detected, it's going to automatically start syncing with all of the things that I want it to be syncing. So if I have a new user come in, but for some reason I don't want to be syncing their drive right away, or I don't want to be syncing their email right away until I go in manually and add that as a permission, then you can do that here. But otherwise, if you have all these boxes checked, every time you add a new user, it's automatically going to bring them in there and start syncing them once it detects that in your account. Then finally, this is what I mentioned here with the backup policy in terms of your versioning settings. So you can go here and schedule backups to be taking over a certain place of time if I want them to be taking over at night at 10 p.m. or something to that effect. But we strongly recommend using continuous backup because this takes advantage of all the hours in a given day to be backing up that data. And again, as your organization scales in terms of the number of O365 accounts, it's really important to be taking advantage of all those hours in the day so that you're not rushing to get a backup task completed. And then the other thing too is you can set here for the number of days you want historical version to be preserved. You can choose to preserve all versions. So again, this is with Microsoft's E3 plan, if that's what you're on, against the most popular plan, they only have it for 30 days. So you can have it for all going back to whenever you started backing up, but you can also set a number of days that in case you don't want to be taking up more storage space on the NAS. Are the backups read-only? Good question. The backups themselves, so the backups can be restored in terms of you can overwrite what the account is in the O365, what the original format of that was in the Office 365 account itself. So in the email inbox, you choose restore, you can restore an email to go back there. So in effect, really not read-only in that, I mean, people can't go in and make changes to the backups over time, but people can restore and overwrite a previous version of a file. So the next thing I'm going to open up here is the Active Backup portal. So you can actually create a self-restore portal for every single user on the NAS. So people can actually go in here, and if they accidentally delete a file, they don't have to contact you as the IT admin. They can go in here and restore that file on their own. And I'm going to open it up for my email inbox. And so you'll see at the bottom here is a timeline. And so I can scroll along and I can see what my email looked like at any particular point in time. So you'll see how it changes over time. And so again, let's think back to, let's say I had an email on mid-October and I accidentally deleted it, and now it's 30 days past since then, so that email is gone forever. I can just go in here and I can click restore, and then that'll restore that email back to my inbox. I can also choose to export it if I just want to download it as an Outlook file, and that'll download straight to my computer. And same thing with OneDrive files as well. So I can click on this OneDrive file right here. I can go to export, and that'll just download it straight to my computer. So really simple in terms of restore process. Any questions on Active Backup for O365?
No, going well so far. Good information.
Yeah. So I'm gonna hop back into the PowerPoint. And so yeah, well, we're gonna talk about some best practices for security next. So in particular, I wanted to focus on 3 things that I think are most important in terms of making sure your NAS is secured. The first is making sure you have a good strategy for managing your passwords. And particularly as an admin, we'll talk about 2-factor authentication. Then also auto block IP to prevent any brute force attacks. This is really essential. I recommend every single NAS make sure they set up some kind of auto block IP policy. There's no reason not to, in my opinion. And then third is an SSL certificate to make sure that your connection to the NAS is encrypted. So first, with password strength, this is really simple to set up. If you go to user, you can set this up in terms of creating a password strategy for all users on the NAS. So you can say things like, make sure that people have at least numeric characters, at least some special characters, set a password length, and then also make it so that they can't have more than one password over time. So that's what the password history is there. So this is very important to make sure that you're setting for your users so that their passwords are strong. In addition to that, there is a security advisor, which is it's kind of like a scanner on the NAS, and it can scan all of the passwords for all users and let you know if there are any users who have very weak passwords. If they're using the standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or ABCD or something like that, it'll let you know and say, hey, there are some users on here who don't have good passwords, and it'll tell you who, so you can reach out to those people and tell them that they need to buff up their password strength. But you can also make it to where they can't even create a password without obtaining these specific rules here. And then finally, two-factor authentication. We strongly recommend this, particularly for the admin users, to make sure that nobody can access DSM and make changes without that two-factor. So we support Google Authenticator. There's a couple other authenticator apps that we support as well. So make sure that you at the very least set that up so that you need to have your cell phone with you when you're logging in, so that nobody can go in, and if they somehow obtain your password, they still won't be able to log in without your smartphone. And then next is auto block IP. So this is basically going to look and see if the same IP address is continually pinging the NAS. It's a common method of brute force attacks to continually ping with a bunch of different password combinations to see which one might finally work. I'd recommend setting this for maybe 5 or 10 login attempts within 5 minutes. If somebody's doing that, it's possible that it could be a user who just accidentally forgot their password, and so they're guessing and going through some of the old passwords that they remember. And if that's the case, you can take them off the list. They can contact you and say, hey, I accidentally locked myself out of the NAS, and can go in from there. But outside of that, I mean, the only other real situation where that could take place is if somebody is actually actively trying to log in when they don't know the password. So this will make it so it'll automatically block them from accessing the NAS if they're doing that within a certain amount of time. And then you can also look and view an IP list whenever a block does occur. You can also set it to where you'll get notifications as well, whether email or SMS text. So you can say, hey, I want to be notified, and have an email sent if somebody is blocked. And then that way I know either it's a user, one of my users who accidentally forgot their password and I need to help them reset that password, or it's actually a nefarious actor. And then I can keep them blacklisted from ever accessing my NAS. And then finally, an SSL certificate. This is very important to make sure the environment is encrypted. So the first thing you're going to want to do here is add a domain. If you don't have a domain, you can actually create your own using Synology. We have a method to do that. And then you can import your SSL certificate. By default, you can use Let's Encrypt, which is an open source version of SSL certificate, but you can also add your own as well. You go to the security settings in the control panel to do this. And then finally, you can configure services and determine who will actually use that particular certificate, which services. So whether it's you want Active Backup to be using it, or Synology Drive, or any of the other services on the NAS itself, you can set all of that by individually and choose which ones use which certificates. So hop back in here to DSM and just quickly go through how to do all this. So if I go here to control panel, and I'll see, first thing we're going to do is look at passwords. So I'm going to go to user. And again, this is where I can set specific password settings for all the users on my NAS. And then I can enable a password expiration date as well. So I can make it to where people have to reset their passwords every 3 months or every 6 months, or however long I want to. And then finally, this is really important, is enforcing two-step verification for your admin users. So you can set that up with an authenticator app like Google Authenticator or any of those other ones, and make it so that people will need to have your smartphone with you when you're logging into the NAS. And then going back to the auto block. So if we go here to control panel and go to security, go to account, this is where we can enable auto block IP. You can set it for a certain number of login attempts within a certain amount of time. The other thing too is you can enable block expiration. So if you want to automatically unblock an IP after it's been blocked, you can set that as well. In case somebody did this on accident, they can you can unblock them after a period of days. Really, the best way though is to just work with them to reset the password, because they might have just forgotten their password and they need to create a new one. So you can work with them on that. And then to install an SSL certificate, you just go here to the certificate tab in the same security section of control panel and click add. Again, you need to make sure you have a domain set up, and then you can just go here to add a new certificate. You can also replace an existing one. And again, you can use Let's Encrypt for free. It's an open source version of that. And that's what I've personally set up. And then if you want to set that for particular services, you just go here to configure. And so these are all of the services that I have open on my particular NAS. So there are some services here that aren't open just because I haven't installed them personally. Things like, surveillance station would be an example there. But all of the services that you're currently using, if you're using Active Backup, if you're using Synology Drive, those will all show up, and then it's going to show you which particular SSL certificate is using that they're using to encrypt. Okay. So we're going to hop back to the PowerPoint one last time. And all the things that we talked about with regards to security are really important, but the best way to make sure your NAS and data is secure, particularly against ransomware, is to make sure you have offsite copies of your data. And in particular, it's really important to have read-only copies offsite. So I think Kenneth mentioned something about, I'm sorry, Kenneth, I saw you asked another question about setting up block IP range. I don't know if you can set up block IP range. Let's actually take a quick look at the allow block list. So if we go to the allow block list here, so you can create, in terms of creating a specific IP address to block, if there's one you have been attacked by before, you can set that here and you can say, hey, I want them to be blocked forever. And again, if somebody is going to be continually pinging the NAS and they do get blocked, they'll immediately be added to this list. You can also create an allow list as well if there are certain IP addresses in your environment that you fully trust and you don't want them to have to deal with being blocked. You can do that here. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but you can set specific IPs to be blocked. I don't think you could set a specific range or a general range of IPs though. You can also import an IP address list. So if you have one as an Excel spreadsheet, that's an option as well. Anyways, going back to snapshot replication. But yeah, so Kenneth, you also asked about read-only files. So we strongly recommend using snapshots because this is going to be a read-only copy that's off-site, or if you replicate it off-site. So you can create snapshots on the NAS itself, and then that'll be secured on the NAS. But the main draw here is you can also replicate them to another Synology NAS. So if you have multiple office locations, if you have a colo facility somewhere, maybe even your own home office, you can snapshot the data over there. Snapshots can be taken as often as every 5 minutes. These are point-in-time versions of what the shared folder looked like. And the other thing too that's really important about snapshots is this is the best way to replicate iSCSI LUNs. So if you're using Synology as block storage, if you're using it for VM storage in particular, the best way to send or to back up LUNs is with snapshots. It's very fast, and it also makes it a lot easier to fail over those LUNs and restore them in the event that something happens to the VM host or the VM data store. So we'll hop back into DSM one last time here. And I'm just going to show how to create and schedule snapshots. So if I go here to, actually I'm going to go into this NAS right here. So if I go here to snapshots, I can see what shared folders I've scheduled. So you'll see the blue schedule button if I'm already taking snapshots of a particular folder. If I don't have any protection set up yet, you'll see this orange button right here. And if I go here to settings, I can see what my snapshot schedule is. So this Active Backup for Business folder, I'm taking snapshots of it every day, every 5 minutes, so as often as I possibly can. I can also set a retention policy. The max number of snapshots that a given shared folder can have is 1,024. So anything between 0 and 1,024, you can set that here. You can also set advanced retention rules, though, if you want to set some kind of grandfather, father, son policy. I can say it's something like, I want to take 24 snapshots, so 1 snapshot per hour every hour for the last day. And then I can say 1 snapshot every day for the last week, 1 snapshot every week for the last month, and then 1 snapshot every month for the last year. And then I can maybe have snapshots going back 4 or 5 years before then. So if you add them all up, that's not too many snapshots, about like maybe 50. If I'm doing the mental math right in my head. So not a whole lot, so it's a lot less than 1,024, but it cycles over, so I'll have a good spread of snapshots over time. So this is probably the best way to do it in the most efficient way, but if you want to take advantage of all 1,024, you can do that as well by setting that here. And then when it comes to replication, so as I mentioned, you can send these snapshots to another Synology NAS off-site. It is one of the best ways to protect yourself against any ransomware attacks so that even if somehow auto-block IP, two-factor authentication, those should protect you about 99% of the time. But if there was any sort of way that somebody somehow got access to this NAS, the best way to protect yourself from ransomware, from somebody taking your data and holding you hostage, is to have read-only copies offsite, because they're read-only. Nobody can make any edits to them. And all you need to do is just fail over to those versions of the data, and then you can kind of start from scratch with the other NAS. You can reset the NAS that these are on and start from scratch there. So the way to do that is just go to create. It's going to ask you to, if you want to just, so you can replicate from one volume on the NAS to another volume. So it doesn't have to be from one NAS to the other. But the most useful part of this is when you're replicating to a remote site. And then it'll ask you to enter in your server name and IP address. So then you'll want to set up port forwarding rules if this is in a different geographic location. You can also snapshot to another NAS that's in the same environment as yours. So either way, and then once that's done, you can see here what it looks like in terms of setting up the replication task. And then that folder will actually show up on the remote NAS as well. So you can view it over on that NAS in addition to seeing it here in the replication task. So you'll say, hey, this is the one that's located on volume 1 on my NAS, and it's being replicated to slab_SHA cluster. So this is another NAS that's in the environment at our US headquarters. And if I ever need to recover any of these snapshots, I can go here to one of my, so remember that active backup for business folder that currently is being scheduled to take snapshots every 5 minutes. I can click on that folder and then click recover. And so these are all of the different versions of this shared folder going back however far my versioning policy is. So you'll see here the earliest one I have is from February earlier this year. And it's just the way I've set it up, my versioning policy. I can click action and I can choose to restore the folder to this snapshot. So that's going to overwrite everything. But I can also clone the shared folder with a new name. So if I don't want to overwrite my existing data, but I want to see what my active backup or business folder looked like, say back in February, just click clone with a new name, and then I'll automatically create a new shared folder for me. So that's about it for snapshot replication. Any questions on that? Okay. So with that said, that was actually everything I had planned for today.
Awesome.
So any Synology related questions that I haven't, oh, sorry, Kenneth has a, can you block a China domain? So you can block domain names. Yeah, I'm not sure about the, I assume you mean the .cn part of the domain name. I haven't set that up myself, so I'm going to get back to you on that. But I know you can block specific domains if you need to. So let me get back to you on that, Kenneth. Any other questions?
Actually, yeah, go from the crowd, but I do have a couple of questions for you too, Rowdy, but we can see if anybody else has questions. Going. All right, I have a couple questions for you, Rowdy.
Mm-hmm.
Can retention rules be set up on the NAS for specific files?
So you would do that by setting the retention rules on the snapshots, because that's what's setting your versioning policy essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, not on files. It would be on the shared folder level.
Okay.
And so, sorry, going back, if you think about Synology Drive, what we talked about earlier, you are able to set individual folders retention policy there. So not just the shared folders, but also the subfolders as well. You can say, here's what I want my versioning policy to look like for that particular folder. So that is also an option. And then you can also set how many versions by default you want the files themselves to get. But that's going to apply to all files. It's not something you can granularly go in and individually set for each file, if that makes sense.
Yep. Are there any disk encryption capabilities with the product?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We do support self-encrypting drives, but only on the Synology UC3200, and that device is a little different. So that device supports snapshot replication, but it does not support any protocols or any other applications. So it doesn't support Active Backup Row 365 or any of the other things we've talked about. But I think it's something we might add in the future, but right now it's just the UC3200 that we have that supports self-encrypting drives.
Okay. Let's see here. So you mentioned support and working with iOS apps. Are there any other things with iOS that I guess could you give just a quick overview of iOS support or Macintosh Mac
Yeah,
support?
yeah, great question. So actually, a lot of our services have their own versions of iPhone apps. So if you're using Synology Mail Plus server, which is you can create a mail server on the Synology, that has its own iOS app. Synology Chat, which is our chat room, has its own iOS app. Video Station, so you can view Synology, the videos that are on your Synology NAS from your iOS. I use that all the time. It's very handy. So yeah, not not just Synology Drive. I'm not sure if there's any location on our website specifically that lists out the iOS apps. I'm pretty sure there is. If you go to our download center, it should have them listed out. But yeah, more than just what I mentioned on Synology Drive, there's a lot of different applications. Surveillance Station is another one. So we have if you're using Synology as surveillance station, you can view your cameras on your iOS with DS Cam, which is its own standalone app as well.
Okay, cool. Um, so the software that we've seen, so the things that you've shown us come as part of your Synology purchase, right? You buy a NAS, you get the
Mhm.
tools that you showed, licensing. So I guess my question is, for lack of a better way to describe it, how far down the food chain do these capabilities go? I mean, so obviously they're on the larger units that are, more enterprise class, but how far down the food chain does the use of the software go?
When you say use of the software, do you mean like are
Like
all
if
the
I were to,
operations
yeah, if
on
I were to
the
get like a
desktop?
disk station, like one
Yeah.
of the disk station machines,
Mhm. Yeah, great. That's a great question. So there are some models in what I brand as our consumer-oriented models. Like the DS120J is an example. The DS120J only has a few applications. So like Active Backup for O365 will not work on that. That's the raffle item, by the way. So some of the consumer-oriented ones, but those are ones I would never recommend for a business anyway. When you get to about the DS220 Plus, that has an MSRP of $300, and that supports everything we've talked about. So that supports our hypervisor virtual machine manager, supports active backup, surveillance station, all that you can run on it. Theoretically, I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of those things, like just because it is a
right?
lower power model. I mean, it can only go up to about 2 gigs of RAM. So it's very not very powerful processor.
Well,
But that's pretty much the lowest. And then going up all the way up to all of our enterprise units, they all pretty much support the same amount of software. They all support active backup, Synology Drive. The one exception there in terms of enterprise models is the UC3200, which I mentioned is the one that supports Synology encrypting drives. But all that supports is snapshot replication and iSCSI protocol, and that's it. So it doesn't even
okay.
support SMB protocol, doesn't support active backup or any of that.
Well, my next question kind of fits in with the last one, and that is, if somebody is intrigued by what they see here and if they find it kind of interesting, but they don't really want to jump in with both feet, they want to get a unit to play with.
Mhm.
What would be the best unit for someone to get as a test bed or just something to mess with so they can see the capabilities but not have a big spend initially? What would be a
Yeah,
good
great question.
play unit?
I'd lean towards, I mean, the 220 plus technically will work. That's a 2-bay unit, but I would lean towards a DS420 plus or a DS920 plus. Again, assuming that you're not going to be backing up much, or if you are going to be using active backup, it's only for like 1 or 2 PCs. Both of those
Right.
units will work fine for that. I personally, in my own, I use a DS1618 plus, and it's really good because it allows you to upgrade up to 32 gigs of RAM. So that one's very good for a small office, but for someone who just wants to try out the software for themselves, yeah, I'd lean towards the 420 plus or the 920 plus. Just make sure that your expectations are set. You're not going to have too many users, not going to have too many
Right.
backup endpoints and things like
Right.
that.
Yeah, I was just thinking for if they have they want a sandbox to mess with something and just to better understand it. That's not a big spend, and maybe they don't have to,
Mhm.
dent on the pull for the capital dollars.
Yeah, all of our desktop models, as I said, everything from the 220 plus up, that's a desktop model will support it, and most of those are under $1,000 MSRP.
Then I guess my last question, and does anybody else have any question? I don't mean to monopolize this time. I just had a few questions. All right. So I guess my last question, or it's more of a statement or a request, is, there's a perception. I mean, I think people perceive, we talked about this on our first call where people perceive Synology one way, but I think if you could just elaborate on the size of units, like you have small consumer units. I mean, and one kind of like what we're talking about today as far as the raffle goes. But how big of a enterprise can Synology support? Just kind
Yeah.
of
So
be a little bit about that, because I don't think people think of it that way a lot of times.
yeah, let me exit out of the PowerPoint. I'll really quickly pull up on our website. The SA 3400 right now is our largest expansion capability. So this is a 12 bay unit. And it's built for SAS drives primarily. So you can expand this to up to 180 drives in a single array. So that is with the RX 2417 SAS expansion unit. So those it's a little confusing because this is 3.5 inch, although if it's 3.5 inch drives, drive bay, it'll still support a 2.5 inch drive. Um, but if you add the 2.5 inch expansions, you could have a total of 180 drives all in a single array. And then if you want to add, if you still want to stick with just 3.5 inch drives, you can have up to 96. So that is the current limit, but we are working on products that are going to go even more than that, that'll allow you to have, potentially petabytes in a single array. So we're constantly adding and increasing that capability. But right now, this is our highest expansion capability product.
All right. Awesome. Very good. Before we go to the wheel of fun and happiness, does anybody have any questions they want to throw out there? All right. Well, Haley, are you ready to spin the wheel for happiness and dollars? Well, not dollars, product.
Oh, yeah, just about.
Who won it last time? Oh, yeah, Bruce won it. Did Bruce win it last? Who won the last one? Was it Raj?
I think it was Raj, if I
I think it was
recall.
Raj, yeah.
All right, ready?
Yep, let's go. Ross, Super Ross.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
There you go, man. That's awesome.
Congrats, Ross.
Thank you.
Yep, very cool. Very cool. So everybody in attendance today will get a $5 gift card from Subway, so you can go out and get your PowerLunch sandwich. and yeah, Ross, congratulations on winning that product. That's a good one.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Good
Yep,
demo
awesome.
too. Very informative.
Yep, Rowdy, thank you very much for your time today. Yeah, some neat stuff in there. Yeah, really enjoyed hearing about it. And if anybody has questions, we can feel free to reach out to me anytime. And if we need to get Rowdy engaged, if you want to have a session with him, we can set that up to get some more probably detailed technical information to you as well.